And well, that story on Malava brings us to our discussion. And with me is an amazing panel. We have Stella Agara, who is a governance analyst. Stella, lovely to see you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And of course, we have also Dismas Mukua, a political analyst.
Thank you.
We were discussing this the other day, Stella, and I was telling you, you were very not confident about the IBC being able to clamp down on any security issues. And we've seen quite a few cases of violence across the country. And I think that's where I'd like us to begin. We have seen Malava violence. We saw earlier on the parliamentary candidate, Seth Panyako, burst into tears, at a polling station, claiming that there were goons after his life. My question to you, do we need urgent reforms in the electoral security and maybe perhaps a stronger enforcement of political tolerance in our country?
I think my immediate response to you will be an absolute yes, number one. But number two, and most important, we need a reminder to our security forces on what they need to be safeguarding on an election day. We are not supposed to be having our security forces protecting the interests of a certain individual or a certain side in the elections. We are supposed to be having security forces protecting the interests of the nation in having a free and fair election. So for me, there are a number of things that I've observed around the security of this election. The first thing is that there is heavier investment in securing the interests of the government than there is in securing the interests of all the candidates in the election. I can see, and indeed, someone would argue that maybe Panyako needs to go through the proper mechanisms to report whatever incidences he's witnessed, for example, in Malava, and all the other candidates who are complaining. But the bottom line is, as a referee, IBC is required to take all reports, not just the ones that come to them formally, even the ones that they hear about, and ensure that they're reporting them to the authorities if the authorities have not gotten that information, so that they can secure what is happening. Why? Because an election is not just about people walking out there and voting and coming out. It's also about the impression given by the environment around an election. We first thought there was going to be a problem with the elections in Tanzania long before it happened because of the arrest of the opposition candidate. We, at that point, possibly could not even tell if he had the capacity to beat the sitting candidate. As a matter of fact, there's a possibility if they had campaigned in tandem, maybe she could have found a way to convince the voters that she was going to win. But because the man is in jail at the time of campaign and for frivolous grounds, as a people, we decide that that election is not fair. That's the same situation here. When you have an election coming mad with violence, the kind of violence we have observed in Kasipul before the announcement of all the candidates, at the point after the candidates had been confirmed, the violence continues for so long, IBC does not crack the whip. And I remember in our conversation, one of the things you brought up was the fact that IBC had fined a few candidates. And I told you, a fine for an individual with the kind of resources these individuals have is not punitive enough. And in the coming national election, it's going to be extremely difficult to disqualify any candidate because people will cry foul tremendously. But in a by-election, you get to flex your muscle. In a by-election, you get to set the standards. In a by-election, you get to try out some of the things you may not be able to try in a full-on election and ensure that people behave themselves. I think there has been extreme force used to curtail the free engagement in campaigns by let me not call it the united opposition, the opposition in general. Number two, I think there has been a lot of efforts to curtail individuals within the constituencies or the counties that were assumed to be the counties that will be deciders of the lifeline of political parties. And that is why you can see the attention is heavily drawn to places like Mbere, Malava, etc. And assuming you now understand that those are the areas where the contest is going to be strongest, I would have expected that the security agents of this nation would have focused their attention in ensuring that those places are safe. And I feel like the IBC has, but actually, they have been in character. In that conversation, I said that the IBC seems to be afraid to crack the whip. Number two, I said that they're not engaging the different agencies that they should be engaging in a manner that safeguards their reputation, especially in an election like this one, where they had more to prove than anybody else. I also think that generally, for purposes of everything that everyone has observed, irrespective of how scanty the news is coming from everywhere else, there is much less confidence in the IBC now than there was before we started this election. And this is quite a loss for IEBC, considering the kind of election they're about to host for this nation.
Dispense, your thoughts?
Well, it's unacceptable that you can have political violence when people are casting their ballots. And I've seen a statement by the Political Parties Liaison Committee, PPLC, the umbrella group for all the political parties, condemning this political violence. In my mind, it's unacceptable. But where does the buck stop? The buck stops with the law enforcement officers. So there is merit in having IBC working with law enforcement officers, members of the civil society, to come up with an early warning system so that you can actually anticipate, you do scenario analysis, sensitivity analysis, and predict, even using AI, where you are likely to have political violence and nip it in the bud. That is number one. Number two, anybody who is engaged in political violence, I think now the law enforcement officers and IBC should use them as an example for the 2027 general elections. Now, anybody who has participated in political violence, either as an architect, or you financed it, or you are the actual goon who has received money, you must be held accountable. Because if you don't control what has happened today, then there's a very high probability that 2027 may be chaos. So there's a valid expectation that the law enforcement officers, the next few days, they're going to do solid investigations and ensure these guys are brought to book. Now, when you talk about politicians, the probability does exist that some of the politicians who are crying wolf, in fact, would be the architects of political violence. Because we know, I mean, in an African election, the politicians who, when they sense defeat, in the morning, they can actually come up with political violence. We've known some politicians who claim they've been assassinated. They even go ahead to stone their own cars. We know politicians who claim that the political competition is engaging in mischief. They get T-shirts or campaign paraphernalia branded in the competition's logos and everything, and do that. Like, for instance, conversations from Malava suggest that the issues raised by Seth Panyako could be genuine or may even not be genuine. In my view, that is where the Inspector General of Police needs to zoom in. Because the levels of political violence in Malava is unacceptable.
Do you think
so
there's
it
some
needs
sense
to
of,
zoom in.
Do you think there's some sense of politicization of the police as we speak right now?
Well, in my view, the Inspector General of Police, according to the Kenyan Constitution, has got autonomy. He operates on his own motion, and the only thing he gets from the administration is policy direction, again, which must be in writing. But when a property is set on fire, when you lose a life, it does not need to wait for instructions from anybody. It needs to move on its own motion. Whether the person, the architects, the financiers are from UDA or ODM, UDM, whichever political party it is, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't do that, then the guys who have done the violence today will say, this was, we're just doing press-ups. We'll wait for 2027. Actually, in my view, we even need to kill this culture coming up in Kenya. There's something called goons, and people seem to be celebrating goons. I don't know whether we need a special law to ensure that we don't have these people, because in parts of Kasipul Kabondo, people masquerading as party officials were in fact goons. And I understand some of them even had weapons. So can you imagine if somebody walks into a hall with a weapon? Which is why the report by Ben Kiru is very exciting from Malava, that if you're not accredited, if you're a journalist and not accredited by the media, they're not allowing you in. That you only get in when you are accredited. So it therefore means that IBC has got a register of everybody going in. So in the unlikely event that somebody decides to cause violence in that voting hall, then people, you can actually pick out somebody. In the morning, again, we had a very disturbing and disrupting event where the Attorney General, the former Attorney General, who served as a public servant of rank, who has been the chief law enforcement officer, all of a sudden becomes a wrestler. I mean, you may have seen him wrestling a young man. Do you know how dangerous it is for a man, first of all, the reputation of Justin Muturi and his age? If the young man overpowered him and, there's you remember WWF, there's a wrestling match, and for some reason, a rock lands on Justin Muturi, right now we'd be having, serious issues. And then a journalist, I think from this media house, posted a very good question that, Mr. Muturi, have you been accredited by IBC to be here? Guess what he said?
Is it party leader?
I'm the party leader. So does it mean that when you're a party leader, who has got a superior understanding of Kenyan law than most Kenyans, actually than most lawyers, then now you've got a blank check to saunter it to any place simply because you're a party leader? So if we expect the Moras and Wanjiros to keep the law, then there's a valid expectation that the party leaders must do the same. Again, yesterday we had a news conference where a number of politicians said they've got evidence of ballot stuffing, evidence of voter bribery. One again would expect that this information is presented before the law enforcement agencies, because you cannot have public servants, or rather political parties, their leadership, people who are highly regarded in society, making statements without presenting evidence. And you know, that is now why you talk about misinformation and
even looking at
disinformation.
the pictures that we were looking at just now, they were showing on the screen. Of course, like you've mentioned, Justin Muturi ruffled up someone earlier on, one of the MCAs from Nyeri, I believe. And it begs the question. They are taking matters in their own hands. They've become law enforcement officers, so to speak. So what is the role of police then, if some of those leaders have to take matters in their own hands? What's the role of the IBC in such a scenario where this is happening at one of the polling stations?
Leah, this is where maybe I depart from Dismas's argument about this situation. An election is an event that is happening as we speak. It's not something that is happening and you have the leisure to report matters later. You also don't have the leisure to do prolonged investigations because you need to establish exactly who is behind which goons. I imagine, I don't know, I'm not a policewoman, so I don't know. I imagine that at the first interaction with, for example, the 17 people who are arrested in Kasipul today, the first question the police is asking these people is, who sent you? Who are you linked to? Can you prove to me that this person is the one who sent you? If you know the name of the candidate who's linked to these people, there's no need to keep the identity of this person secret. There is no need to keep the identity of this person secret, and it's not the police's work to report. But they have a responsibility to report back to the IBC that these individuals apparently have claimed to be associated with whoever. If the candidate there's proof that he has connected, these are matters that can be sped up through the different tribunals and through expedited court processes. I am basically saying that we don't have the luxury of time when it comes to an election, number one. Number two, when you know that you have contenders in an election, you ensure that every contender is protected. When you have individuals from different persuasions in a polling station, immediately the police should use their sensibility, knowing what elections normally look like, to ensure that they're constantly vigilant of that kind of environment. By the time you find a place that has several police officers, we've been seeing military tankers the whole day, and then there's a fracas. And even that one, before it is disrupted, it gets to the point where the situation with the former AG got. For me, it basically means that someone is sleeping on the job. The other thing, and I think your reporter mentioned, that he's in a polling station where the politicians linked to a certain persuasion are in the polling station, and those who are not linked to that persuasion are not in the polling station.
Politicians are there.
The Kenya Kwanza politicians are
waiting
there.
for the results.
For me, the first question I'm asking myself is, the IBC has said, and it's been written in news articles the whole day, that they will not allow any politicians to hang around the polling stations. What is the rule of exception that has allowed them to allow those ones to be in the polling station, for example? For me, about an election, it's first of all fairness. If you're going to apply a rule, does it apply to everyone? Number one. Number two, if you're providing protection, provide protection for everybody. Number three, the IG and all his officers know what elections look like in Kenya. They know what causes trouble to erupt, so they know what they need to stop. As a matter of fact, if they know that these two, and they get intelligence, if they know that these two people cannot be in the same space, making sure that even as they operate in that space, you manage how they interact. They are not doing this for their own sake, they're doing this for the sake of the image of that election. And that's why I started by saying the first assignment is to secure the interests of Kenyans in that election, to see that it is free and fair.
Can we trust the IBC?
The next assignment is to ensure that the interests all those agencies that are working on elections are taken care of because those are the system that Kenyans are trusting to deliver the results for them. So if you make the IEBC look like it is partial, if you make the police agencies look like they're inclining in one direction, if you make it look like you're asserting more your force towards one direction than the other, even if you're doing the right thing, it becomes difficult to convince the viewer that you are actually interested in safeguarding the elections and you look like you're protecting the interests of certain individuals.
And that brings me to the question, can we trust the IEBC based on the events of today? Of course, the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of activities, some bit of hostility, but today's events, can they tell us whether we can trust the IEBC to be able to deliver a credible and peaceful election come 2027?
You see, for me, this is something I wanted to say in our last interaction here, and it's just been 2 days. I wanted to say that I have no confidence in the IEBC delivering a free and fair election, but that I decided to hold on to my thoughts until I see how they conduct themselves today, because you must always give them the benefit of doubt. You never know. Maybe they're truly committed. But after observing what has happened with just 20-something elections, I now know for a fact that this IEBC, as currently constituted, does not have the capacity to handle the energy, the motivation, the interests that are going to be coming in our elections in 2027. And I'm also questioning the capacity, and I agree with the Honorable Sifuna, I'm questioning the capacity of our security agencies from the very top individual, Murkomen, on their capacity to be able to secure this nation even as we go through such a heated election. I think if they are not capable of delivering an election for Kenya, one of the things that they must make a decision to do now is to make room for the right people to actually come in and deliver that election. This nation has been through too much trouble as far as elections are concerned. We cannot afford the kind of carelessness they have demonstrated in this election happening all over the nation. And I promise you, in the coming election, it's even going to be more stressful. The number of people you've seen shouting, whether it's 1 term or 2 term, are just going to grow exponentially. And what is going to happen is that we'll have an ungovernable situation. We don't need that with the coming election.
Dismas, do you think we can trust the IEBC given today's events?
Absolutely. You know, in my view, when you're talking about this election today, in the election delivery process, there are so many players. And at the end of the day, the person who actually gets the blame, sometimes it's not justified 100%, it's IBC. Like, for instance, when you talk about politicians or political parties assembling goons to go and destroy lives and properties outside a polling station, outside a polling area, then do you think it's erroneous to blame IBC for that incident? However, where IBC takes the blame is the recent incidences where there was where there was violence, and then you give, you know, the penalty that you expect people to pay. I mean, guys who are going to run for elections, they've assembled resources, and you tell them to pay $1 million bob. That is a drop of water in the ocean for them. In fact, that gives them a license to engage in political violence, because they say, I mean, if the penalty is $1 million bob only, then let me go beat up a few more guys, let me destroy lives and properties, and then it's going to be $1 million bob. In my view, if I was seated as an IBC commissioner, anybody, either by omission or commission, engages in political violence must be disqualified from running for an electoral process, any position in Kenya.
Correct.
So that, you know, you instill, understand there's a saying in the West, you instill the fear of the good Lord in these people's system. But if it's $1 million bob only, I mean, and you know, they were given, I think, 12 hours. All of them, I don't know whether they wrote checks or they did them.
They produced it.
They did it rubbing their hands with glee, saying, what is the big deal? That is number one. Number two, I'm not sure whether I agree with what Stella said, because that reporter from Malava said he was reporting live from a tallying center. So it's not exactly at a polling station. And you know, when IBC is about to pronounce the winner, as we said last time, a rational politician will know that he's going to get a beating, and a rational one will know that he's about to win. And you know, success has got many fathers. So I think that people in Malava are waiting for Ndakwa to be pronounced the winner, so all of them share in that glory. But for us to make progress, in my view again, we must have a special task force or a certain committee constituted to investigate the actual cause of violence during this by-election and then come up with a solution so that we don't get into trouble. Because right now we've seen, I mean, this is something like an early warning system. We've actually seen what is likely to happen in 2027. So we'll be flying blind if we don't get the key players to set up a certain committee, a commission of inquiry to establish what, because believe me, Leah, anybody who carries a sword or a panga to a police station, unless you're a Maasai man, you know this is illegal. So what gives you the guts to carry a weapon? Who gives you the guts to break into somebody's car, somebody's hotel? Who gives you the guts to start violence because you suspect that you are losing? And in my view, when we do these investigations, we must not just land on the poor Mora who are told to go to a particular polling station and cause violence. We need to establish who gave the orders and who signed the check. Who did, who actually gave the money? Because
and perhaps it's issues like these, perhaps, that are leading to what we are seeing, the low voter turnout in some of those constituencies. That's just perhaps a question I need to pose to both of you. Talking about voter apathy, we saw very low voter turnout in some of the constituencies. Very shocking, because campaigns have been going on for quite some time. Some of those constituencies have quite a number of voters who are registered officially by the IEBC. But yet the numbers as early as 7 a.m., they were very low. Even at midday, the turnout was still low in some of those constituencies. What do you think about the turnout? Is it that we are seeing Kenyans are, fatigued by the politics, and perhaps the idea that maybe they think, what's the point of going to vote if, in any case, this is what we are witnessing? Will this be credible? What can you say about that? And I'll begin with you, Stella, about the voter apathy question.
You know, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, a phenomenal lady who has vied for MCA in this nation, called Bina Maseno today. And one of the things that she was laughing at as I was speaking was that I was telling her, Mbeere North has always been a very calm area. Mbeere generally has not had the kind of attention that they're receiving right now. Now, wake up in the morning and find tankers in your town. And you're seeing it on TV, or you're hearing from people that there are tankers in your town. You have never seen them before. Do you think the women of that area who only say these things on TV, possibly on CNN or BBC, are now seeing them in the town? Do you think they'll be confident to come out and go and vote? Most likely, they are going to be securing food from the supermarkets or from wherever they normally buy their food, and ensuring that they have stocked up in case something happens as a result of the presence of those tankers. This is why I keep on insisting on what you present to the voter as the environment around an election. That, for me, is the first explanation why women, especially in this by-election, will not participate. This is not just Mbeere. We're talking about what we have seen in Narok, gunshots. We're talking about what we've seen in the most of those elections in Western Kenya, Nyamira, gunshots. Well. What you've seen in Nyamira. As soon as that happens, there is a certain group of people who are convinced not to show up. The other thing with by-elections is that especially the voters who are normally imported, you live in Nairobi but you vote in the village, may not necessarily see the value of investing in that trip to go to the village and go and vote. And so there is no expectation that the numbers are going to be as big as we would have in a national election, especially because also the time given for voting is not normally as rather, they don't have as much time as they normally have before a national election. The third thing that I'll talk about has got to do with getting people to start feeling like this result has already been doctored, and so why should I bother to vote? And I think there's apathy amongst two groups of people that I want to speak about. One is just the general voter who's thinking, if you have already decided who you want to see in this election to the point of this amount of violence, why should I be wasting my time to go and vote? But then there's another group that has been accused tremendously. As I was walking in, I was looking at another image of people making fun of Gen Z and saying Gen Z are the ones who are going to decide 2027 and they're nowhere to be seen on the queues. One of the cautions I want to give to this nation is not to underestimate that group of people, especially when we have not engaged in mass voter registration. The voter registration that has been done in this nation is just continuous voter registration. No mass voter registration has been done. Mass voter registration is normally done, and they take the registration closest to the people to avoid the logistical costs that a citizen would have to take to be able to access registration. That has not happened. When that happens and you do not see Gen Z numbers, then you can now claim they have decided they're not interested in the elections. We have some time.
I know we need to take a short break, and we'll be definitely back to discuss more on that particular aspect of voter apathy. Right now, I want us to take a short break, Stella and Dismas, to just come back and look at some of the stories making headlines across the country. But Dismas, I'll be back to you after the break. And I'll give you a chance to comment. So right now, let's take a short break, but don't go too far. We have much more lined up for you just to help you make sense of the events today, all matters by elections. And of course, we have news from across the country on other stories making headlines. Don't go too far. Stay tuned.